Hello and welcome back to the Open Resourcery. So, this is Devi, and of course, I've got my co host, Twisted.
Yo.
And today we are going over in Magick 101 the metaphysical properties of Earth. So, all of us have heard like Mother Nature and Mother Earth and all of that, and it's typically associated with feminine. But I do believe that Earth really encompasses both. um, in my own practice and in how I feel about it and all of, more intuitive pings, um, the way that Earth is it's not only like the womb of creation where everything in terms of astral or energetic um, magic in and of itself can come through and become manifested in reality, but it is this protective space. So it's not just, feminine, it is masculine at the same time. Um, so with Earth, we have, strength and power. You think mountains, they are immovable, they are completely solidified, except when, of course, there's volcanic activity or earthquakes, and then it is literally causing the ground underneath us to tremble. Earth is protective, but it can be destructive. But it is rebirth and renewal and manifestation and all of these things coming into the physical. So I really do believe that it is massively appropriate for the metaphysics of Earth to be our last stop on the four elements. What do you think?
I'm gonna have to agree with that. In the sense of when it comes to, I guess, how Earth is created, right? Or at least above, you know, the water above sea level and such. From my understanding, it is when volcanoes, which are, full of magma, so the fire element, you could say, goes ahead and interacts with water, gets cooled down by said water, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously water element. And you could say the air element in of itself helps in the cooling down process, just over time of the heat, dissipating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when these three elements come together, you then get land masses in of themselves, once again above sea level, at whatever particular time that said land masses were created. So, in that being the case, yes, from a, I guess, just I'm trying to think of how to put it. Okay, yes, I agree with you. Generally speaking, my apologies for the brain fart, but in any case, in any case, and also if we're gonna look at it from the Kabbalistic tree of life, right,
Mm-hmm.
and how all the different spears are oriented based on their elemental sort of hierarchy, right? Now, this is something we've discussed within the series before, once maybe twice or so. Um, but in terms of the hierarchy, right, of elements and the spears, so starting off on the top, you could say there's the elements of fire, and then going downwards, and based on whether you have a more so older interpretation or a modern interpretation, water and air will be interchangeable. So in the modern interpretation, it's fire, water, air, and then earth. But for the older interpretation, pre Golden Dawn and their obscuration of it, you have fire, air, water, earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of the what exactly is the spear of earth on the tree of life for Kabbalism, that is the spear of Malkuth, which in of itself, at that bottom spear encompasses the last spot on the tree of life and serves as the midway point for the tree of life and the tree of death right below it as like a reflection of that in of itself. The Sephira on top in the Tree of Life, and the Clipoth on the Tree of Death below it, and such. And that midpoint of itself, you could argue relative to, the lower spears, that's, more so of a masculine sort of thing, what have you. But yes, it is the nexus point of, you know, the light and dark, heaven and hell, all these different polarities that we go ahead and can understand experientially, you know,
Mhm.
good and bad, all that sort of thing. Um, it comes to, this is the nexus point, this is the meeting place, this is the intersection where all these things can find balance in of themselves, you know?
Mhm.
So that whole having a singular feminine sort of attribution in of itself, I understand it in retrospect and relative to, like, the other elements, being higher up on that hierarchy, you could say, for that singular sort of thing. But when you look at a grander scheme of things, and yes, it makes sense that, it can have both and all of that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's more so we do have this kind of I almost want to call it like horse blinders, where you have a thought and you can't see anything in your periphery. And the thought is just Mother Earth, Mother Nature, the womb, the nurturing, the safety, the bringing in of life. But it doesn't really take into respect that in order to create life, it does require not only the feminine but the masculine as well. And I've seen this quite a bit. I mean, in terms of like gods and everything, you have like Pan and Cernunnos, and they are literally like fertility gods, but they are over the earth in and of themselves.
Oh yes,
Um, but most creation stories, it starts with like if we go by the Hellenistic Greeks, we have Gaia, and
yes,
Gaia creates the sky, her husband, and it goes on and on like that. But
yes.
yes, which is weird in and of itself in our own view, but that's how they explained it. And
Oh yes,
then, of course, we've got Tiamat, where when her children kill her husband, she kind of loses her shit. And then once she is defeated, her body is torn apart, and part of it is used to create both the heavens and the earth. So, which sounds very, very violent. Um,
oh yes,
but in and of itself, it is respective of the nurturing nature and the rebirth or the creation of Earth, but it's not taking into respect the masculine element at the same time. Um,
oh yeah.
my brain just like stopped functioning for a second, so go ahead and take over.
No, okay. Well, you went ahead and you mentioned Gaia, right? Well, that is definitely something I want to touch upon myself, right? So,
Mhm.
mother, goddess, you could say, a titan by classification, in the, I guess, hierarchy in the Greco-Roman pantheon of the Protogenos, then the Titans, then you could say, the Olympians, the current rulers, and that sort of framework.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess on my list here, I have another Greco-Roman entity to go ahead and mention, that being Demeter, goddess of the harvest, sacred law, and the earth,
Mhm.
um, in of itself and her role. Um, you know, a very popular Demeter is for being the mother of Persephone, and how the tale of Persephone kind of explains the seasons within that particular sort of mythology. And Tiamat, you went ahead and mentioned, for which I believe is Mesopotamian in origin, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Mesopotamia, Babylonian, all that area.
oh yes, and in this particular list that I kind of was like, all right, I'm gonna put together however many I can think of. I have, from the Sumerian mythology of the Mesopotamia region, we got Nin Surhag, who is the mother goddess of the earth, fertility, mounds, and rulers, So that would be the equivalent to Gaia from my understanding.
Hmm.
And then Ki, goddess of the earth. Ki spelled with a Ki, like the energy key, from Eastern sort of systems and all that.
Yes.
Let's see, what else? Whom else can I mention? Well, you know what? Uh, in terms of not necessarily bouncing off what you said, but just starting off
Hmm.
with other regions, we got to go ahead and we got to give shout out to our boy, our man, Archangel Uriel, because obviously, the episode number one was about Uriel. The whole channel in of itself is that is the Patreon entity for Open Sorcery and all that. If you haven't checked out the first pilot conversation between Devi and I, numero uno,
Please do.
and if we're oh yes, and if we're talking about archangels in of themselves, we got to mention Sandalphon because on the Tree of Life in of itself, he happens to govern the spirit Malkuth. Um, Whereas Uriel, when it comes to usual four, archangels that are associated with the four cardinal directions and primarily utilizing the Western ceremonial magic tradition and all that sort of thing, or in the Catholic Church, different Judeo-Christian sort of things, then yeah, it's usually Uriel. But Sandalphon in and of himself gets some respect and all that. And from my understanding, Sandalphon was actually Prophet Elijah, before he transfigured in the biblical tales and such, which in juxtaposition to that, on the top spear of Keter, when you're just looking at the Tree of Life and such, which is the complete polar end of Malkuth, right?
Hmm.
Keter rules over the heavens, so on and so forth, being the closest within existence to God. That is Metatron, um, which actually happens to be um, the prophet Enoch in their transfigured, angelicized form and all that. So they're kind of seen as like twins in a sense because of this,
As my
being the
ears
only
start
two
ringing.
people. Ah, yes. Well, because obviously because when it comes to Metatron and of themselves, there's a particular name out of the many emanations, many different aspects of Metatron that was shared with us to go ahead and call upon, um, sort of thing. If you just look up, like, I think it's 72, 76, however many in the 70 range emanations of Metatron on your good old search engines, you'll find a long list of different names for Metatron if, you feel as so inclined to do so. But in any case, yeah, um, just a little extra tidbit about both of them for the heck of it. In Judeo-Christian, mythologies, those are the only two individuals that are said to have transfigured into higher entities, aside from Jesus Christ, Yeshua,
Hmm.
Yeshua, but tongue tied, Yeshua ben Yosef, Isa, as Muslims and people who practice Islam refer to him as. So yeah, uh, they walked amongst us and all that sort of thing. Um, and also, I guess is a good time to also mention, that's kind of like the inverse of, say, an avatar, a entity coming in, uh, manifesting onto Earth in of itself, incarnating and all sort of thing, which I believe by the time this video comes out, there will be a video where I speak on avatars in themselves.
Hmm.
But not to hamper on those detours anymore long. So let's continue on this list and all that. So talking about like elementals, right?
Hmm.
And earth elementals, from my understanding, gnomes are what you call them, but I don't know if there's other sorts of earth elementals that have like a particular thing, a particular label, or if gnomes are just like the catch-all
It's
for
kind of
all
a
of them.
catch all, but
Um,
you have to figure that each culture has their own name for it, which is one of the reasons why I don't hang on to names so much. Um,
yeah.
but in every culture, you're going to find something different. Gnome has been like the quote Fey equivalent and kind of just accepted um, as like the overarching name for them. I'm sure we will find many more names for them going forward.
Oh yes, yes. So yeah, let's see what else do I got here. Like I said, long list. And right here in the Hindu pantheon, we got Bhumi, goddess of the earth.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you'll continue to notice the theme that, with the feminine association, a lot of these earth entities are going to be female in their distinction. In the Celtic mythology, we have Danu, goddess of the earth. Um, in the Norse, Germanic, Icelandic, um, set of things, we have Nerthus, I believe is particularly Germanic. But then we also have, uh, I'm probably going to butcher these pronunciations, but Jord as a goddess of the earth, Skadi as a goddess of the mountains and winter, and Sif, goddess of the earth. And that is definitely something that I found is that there's quite a few different gods and goddesses of mountains themselves.
Mhm.
Um, Within the Hawaiian mythology, I know I'm going to butcher his name for sure, even though I used to live on dang islands, but um, Papahana Moku is the goddess of the earth. And um, within, the Maori mythology, which, a lot of it is shared with Hawaiian because they're all in the Polynesian, oceanic sort of region, of the Pacific Ocean and such, is very simply put Papa, as opposed to the longer, more convoluted name, at least in my opinion, for the Hawaiian goddess of the earth. And also in the Celtic mythology, not Celtic, Aztec. My apologies. Um, we have I'm definitely gonna butcher this name. Oh my. We have Talal, Tekhu, Lee. Yeah, I'm not going front, but they are pretty much the earth deity whose body created the world itself. And granted, that's all I have on the list right here. But I'm sure if you look into different North American traditions and you look in other regions across the world, damn near everybody's going to have their own version of which intelligence, which god, goddess, what have you, governs over the world in of itself. And if you want to look at it from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, not necessarily of angels, but there definitely is the idea that Satan goes ahead and rules the earth in of itself, right?
Mhm.
To try to tempt man, to try to, like, this is the devil's playground. This is where, you know, those who, the wheat is separated from chaff, and you go ahead and try to see if you can live a upright and moral life, in the moral standards of Judeo-Christianism, the Ten Commandments, so on and so forth, and all that thing. So yes, Satan in himself governs over the earthly plane, from my understanding, which also, due to quite a bit of conflationism between these two, since they're similar names, and also just like uh, delving into, I guess you could say, the conspiratorial aspect of things, and looking up different things such as secret societies and the Illuminati and the whole 13 bloodlines and all that sort of thing, right? Saturn, in of itself, being the planet who governs over the earthly realm. And if you have listened to David Icke before, You could say that this is done by way of this Saturnian moon matrix, is how he referred it in his earlier sort of works and talks. Um, Now he has a bit more of a Gnostic sort of view, where he refers to them as archons, and as opposed to talking about the reptilians and all that sort of thing, which got him flack in the beginning. But I guess me mentioning that in of itself is also a good segue into the subject of how Gnosticism has a particularly negative view of, you know, how the earthly realm is a negative
Yes.
sort of plane. Yes, hell on earth and all of that, and the whole demiurge. And I'll go ahead and pass it on to you while I could speak, well about it. I've been talking quite a bit for a moment, so I'll, allow you to get some air time as
No,
well.
it's all good. No, but I mean, you're not wrong in terms of the Gnostic point of view. They see the earth as dirty and filthy, and everything here is immoral, and just connection with the physical is just something that shouldn't be done, um, which is very sad in and of itself. Um, because, I mean, we're put here for a reason to have an experience, right? And sometimes the reason is just to exist, and
Oh
allowing
yes,
allowing yourself to have that experience of existence. Um,
oh yes,
but they took it, think Puritan, but in an extreme fashion. Um, I believe like it wasn't just or isn't just like chastity and uh, pretty much subs- trying to like off themselves without really offing themselves. It's detachment from the physical world at all costs almost, and it's very destructive, uh
yes.
to say the very least. But I really, with Gnosticism specifically in their attitude towards the physical earth, like I understand their view on the demiurge as having been the one that created the earth, right? Um, just so
Oh
that he would
yes,
have something to lord over.
oh
But
yes.
the rest of their views is just like, ooh, you literally are creating your own misery with your life. That's beautiful.
Oh
Um,
yes. If I could just interject for a
Go for
moment,
it.
just to add a little bit of additional context. This is pretty much like us discussing the basic bitch sort of interpretation of Gnosticism, in that there's many different sects, many different variations of Gnostic ideology that kind of like precede and or come after what you can consider as mainstream Christianity. But in terms of like the reason why they view it, like the earthly plane, in such a negative sense, with the demiurge having created it, is because what exists higher than that, in terms of a true light, a true source, you could say, to use that new age terminology, is called the pleroma. And that, in, like I said, once again, the basic bitch sort of interpretation of it, um, you have an Aeon named Sophia who went ahead and took, you know, some of this light and such and birthed the demiurge. The demiurge was their child and such, say. And the demiurge, being a blind god, Yaldabaoth being a blind god, you could say, relative to us humans and all of the material realm, went ahead and created this to lord over and govern, because they were blind to what was above. They were blind to what was higher or existed primordially before them. And taking
Yes.
those bits and pieces of the pleroma, like, oh, I have some little energy here that, I can go ahead and do stuff with. Well, let me just go ahead and throw it into these different things within the material plane. And some of those things happen to be human beings, which is kind of like the divine fire, the spirit that exists within us all, right? And
Yes.
that is the reason why Gnostics have such a negative view of the earthly plane and all that sort of thing. That the divine fire within us, within our soul spirit, that spirit in of itself, is kept trapped here, you know, in a, to use the term incarceration for like prisons, such like that, you know, incarcerated in these incarnations. You know, the whole wheel samsara
Mm-hmm.
sort of model from the Eastern mythologies and belief systems and all that sort of thing. So yes, that is why Gnostics have a relatively negative view and all that.
Well, I do
Which,
want to
yeah,
add to that because Sophia, um, so the Aeons, Sophia is an Aeon, and they were created in pairs. And Sophia is the feminine of that pair, and she
yes,
created without the masculine um, to complete it. That's the reason why Yaldabaoth is not a perfect being, because he was
yes,
created completely lopsided, with only one over the other. Um, but just I kind of wanted a little asterisk there.
yes,
But in terms of the Wheel of Samsara, I actually did want to like bring around like the pentacle and the pentagram and that kind of thing as well, because the way that I
yeah,
see it is very similar to the Wheel of Samsara, because we start on the bottom left hand side. That is the side of Earth. That bottom
yes,
left hand corner, that's Earth, and then it goes around to air, then spirit, water, fire, and back to Earth. And in that, I do believe that's more of that is the life cycle. And it all returns to Earth and comes back out of Earth. So,
yeah,
we're born, we get intelligence, that air, right? Spirit, we
yeah,
find, that we are one piece of the whole. We are more than our bodies. Water, compassion, emotion, all of those things. And then fire can be destruction, but also creation before we go back into Earth to do it all over again. Um, but in terms of Earth, it's complicated but simplistic simultaneously because of the function that it serves. And so it's difficult to put more words to it than I think we already have.
oh yes, yes. Um, and I guess to go ahead and it was already mentioned before with the whole interrelation of Satan to Saturn and jumping Gnosis and all that, but um, the reason why, like, there's Saturn as a planet, a planetary archetype, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is what actually governs over earthly affairs. And you mentioned the pentacle and all that sort of thing. So, restrictiveness, time, you know, um, boundaries, money, all these sorts of things. The planet Saturn goes ahead and governs over, and you know, pretty much this is its domain in of itself. Keeps the material plane together, the solitary, all that sort of thing. So if one's going ahead and calling upon a particular planetary archetype to work with, you know, Earth matters in of itself, um, in terms of any, planetary bodies aside from the Earth itself, then Saturn is the one you want to go ahead and look to do that with. And in mentioning, planetary bodies or you out in the solar system or in the night sky, what have you, different constellations, might as well segue into the three zodiac signs that are attributed to Earth, which of course would be in the order of the, I guess you could say, spiritual evolution or cycle of them, zodiacally speaking. You got Taurus first, then you got Virgo, and then you got good old Capricorn, um, and all those right there. Um,
Oh yes.
do you have anything additional to add on that front?
I mean, they're stubborn motherfuckers. Um,
Ah, yes. Capricorn Sun here. How you doing? I am very stubborn. She can go ahead and attest
well,
to this right
yes,
there.
but I am also a Capricorn moon, so I give it right back.
Yes.
So it works. So, I mean, Taurus, this one wants to stay more stagnant. This is steady. This is like calm times. Um, it, it's already been shaken up. Let's settle down. Everything's all cool. Virgo, I mean, every time an earth sign is present, it's because fire was right before it. So fire shook things up, fire got things started, and the earth is there to just kind of like, okay, let's bring it back down. And we're good. And we're grounded.
Oh, yes.
So going in that cycle again to kind of prevent things from going too far. It's not necessarily restrictive, it's more preventative measures so that you don't hurt yourself.
Oh, yes. Yes. Always can't always look things in just a positive or a negative sort of viewpoint. There are pros and cons to everything.
Absolutely. Um,
Um, let me see. I do. Let me just scroll up a little bit because I'm not gonna lie. In mentioning all different entities and all that sort of thing, at least relative to the other ones that we recorded, we kind of did that as like the ending point, or like pretty much the last thing we covered. So in that sort of sense, I got okay. Here we go.
I'm just gonna throw
So
you
I
off. It's
guess
great.
oh no, completely fine. Like yeah, but let's see. So right here, I guess first thing I want to go ahead and tackle is like Earth divination in of itself, right? So there's many different variations of divination, as you would well know. Oh, Miss Oracle. Um,
Hardy har har.
but yeah, but yeah, we got actual, divination utilizing the earth in of itself, which is geomancy, the prefix geo meaning earth, similar to like, a geocentric model of the solar system revolving around the earth, and you get the point.
Mm-hmm.
But now there's geomancy in terms of the Western sort of understanding of it, and various other divinatory systems that actually go ahead and utilize earthly materials and such. Um, Once again, Miss Oracle, can you go ahead and, if you happen to have any sort of experience and/or knowledge of geomancy in of itself, by all means, go ahead and share what you got in that department.
Honestly, geomancy is not something that I have looked into. It is not anything that has been prevalent for me. So I don't really. That would be something that I would need to study.
Oh, okay. Now from an Eastern sort of perspective, right? The way that they utilize geomancy, or one of the ways I should say, is through feng shui, for the Asian sort of means of divination. And for those who are kind of within at least the Western sense, the New Agey sort of crowd, they're probably familiar with the concept of feng shui to an extent. In that, like, oh yeah, if I orient the furniture in my room a certain way or have plants, and all that sort of thing, I'll go ahead and, like, have certain energies for this, that, and the other thing. Or for example, oh, if I get a certain plant that's associated with money and I put in this particular location, there will be wealth and abundance and all that sort of thing that comes flooding in. And Devi and I happen to know of at least one individual, one friend of ours who does that sort of thing in that sort of manner. Um, but yeah, let's see. What else can I go ahead and mention? Um, oh, yes. Of course, if we're talking about the earth, we gotta talk about plants. We
Oh,
gotta
absolutely.
talk about yeah, we gotta talk about plants. We gotta talk about trees and all sort of thing. But in particular, just gardening and herbalism and stuff like that. And I know for a fact that is more so your department than mine, because
Yes.
I'm not going. Yeah, oh yeah, I'm not with that in all in terms of like my skill set. That's above my pay grade.
No, because I am a practitioner of physical witchcraft. That is something that I look into frequently. Of course, each plant is going to have its own association. Here's the funny part: because plants hold their own energy, they're not all going to be like quote earth based. They're not going to all hold earth energy. Some of them will actually hold fire energy, like cinnamon. Um, Things of that nature. So just because it comes from the earth does not mean it holds the energy of the earth. Um, it's one of those weird things, but because I use
Nothing is
physical,
static.
no, nothing is static at all, which is one of the reasons why it's so, like I said, it's so simplistic but so complicated simultaneously. It's like blending of genetics, really. How do you describe it?
Oh yes. Um. So yes, talking about the plants and herbalism and all that sort of thing. Um. Might as well go ahead and mention that like how we interrelate with the trees and plants and other sorts of foliage and all that, right?
Mhm.
Like so, as I often use and as an example, as you've heard me say quite a bit, of kind of like a symbiotic sort of relationship that we have with like different intangible entities when working with them, right? When explaining to other people, there is, of course, the exchange that we have with trees and plants that's for our mutual survival and benefit, which is that, plants, they take in carbon dioxide and they exit out oxygen, right? Or at least what we in mass refer to as oxygen. But truth be told, if you look at the elemental structure of the air, then it's got a lot more different elements in it. But the vital component of oxygen is what we humans particularly need.
Yes.
Um, so they go ahead and you could say they excrete, they put out the good old oxygen, and then we go ahead and we intake that. So just to clarify,
So we're
y'all,
breathing in
in
plant
case you
farts.
never
You are literally sitting here and
exactly
saying that we
if
breathe in
if
plant
ex-
farts.
exactly if you never viewed it that way, just know that we're huffing plant farts. That is the biggest takeaway you should take from this conversation. Yes. Um. But yeah, so we intake that oxygen, right? And take a guess as to what we go ahead and exhale. We exhale carbon dioxide in terms of the breathing process. And then it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
And not only that,
And
I do want to say that trees also serve other purposes inside of the more energetic and magical community. Trees will not only take in your carbon dioxide that you're breathing out, trees will also take negative energy because they are the
oh yes,
best transmuters of energy on the damn planet.
oh
Use them.
yes,
They are our friends. They want to help us.
oh yes, most definitely. Um, and talking about carbon dioxide, right? Let's just talk about carbon, right? So carbon, that is the particular element that is responsible for physical material life. And, the six elements on the periodic table of elements and all that sort of thing, which in mentioning the periodic table of elements, we got to go ahead and mention the practice of alchemy in of itself, particularly practical alchemy and chemistry as opposed to, say, spiritual alchemy, which in doing those sorts of practices does not necessarily require a vial and different sorts of chemical compounds and putting them together for different sort of results. Um, but yes, both can be used, either or at the same damn time for one's spiritual evolution. And even if you aren't necessarily focused in that particular field, it's something that we're all doing already. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? To a certain extent, whether you're conscious of it or not necessarily conscious, it's just a part of our structure, our being, our manner of going ahead and existing.
Oh, yeah.
The only difference is perception in how we comprehend our reality.
And I mean, herbalism and alchemy pretty well go hand in hand in that respect. So, I mean, and truth be told, from one of our friends who is very much an alchemist, um, he has told me several times before, alchemy that is not done on both planes, both the spiritual terms of the alchemy and the physical terms of the alchemy, it is not going to function the way that you wanted to. So both are quite necessary.
Oh yes. And in mentioning carbon, right? So that's the sixth element, right? And you know, there's quite a bit of talk of the sixth element. So uh, we're gonna go step back into biblical lore and mythology for the whole 666 mark of the beast sort of connotation, right? And a lot of people looking towards a particular symbol, of the mark of the beast, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
some sort of identification of, oh, it's the end times, and your subservience to, the system and the Antichrist and all these sorts of things that are prophesied in that particular book, as well as throughout many other cultures throughout the world of what, the quote unquote end times will be like on the end of the era, an aeon as it goes. But yes, there's that right there, and at least from my understanding, from an Afrocentric perspective, right, of an African, black-based perspective of things, melanin is seen as like, you know, I believe it's associated heavily with carbon, and that a person's like, how much melanin you have, kind of go ahead and states how in tune with the earth, in tune with divinity that one is, and so on and so forth. And those sorts of Afrocentric spiritual circles, including Afro-Caribbean sort of belief systems, spiritual systems, the Nation of Islam and the Five Percenters, happen to go ahead and speak quite a bit on that, which in of itself is, their own particular viewpoint or own particular spin-off of Islam, you could say. Um, and also in mentioning carbon, right? The number six, the sixth element, right? Now that number six right there makes me immediately think of how the planet Saturn, once again going back to that, governs over the earthly plane, and that it's the sixth planet from the sun. And all that sort of thing. And granted, I could go on more so detours about that sort of realm of things, but uh, I'm not going to harp too much on the. Let's make progress into other avenues and such.
Yes.
Um, so I guess based on what was just said, is there anything in particular you want to go ahead and share your thoughts on, or do you have anything else on your list that you want to go ahead and mention?
No, in terms of my list, I have covered what I wanted to cover. In terms of Magic 101, which I think we've kind of like took a dive into 103 or 5. but
Oh yes. Oh yes.
but tangents are great.
Okay, so I guess from that particular point of like, all right, so carbon makes up physical life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of expanding on that part of things. Then of course we got the physical body, you know, our body is our temple, all that sort of thing, right? And something that we actually, well, I'll go ahead and say me personally, it's funny because like at the time of recording this right here, I've been dealing with my own physical health sort of things past couple weeks and all that. And I just find it funny that at a particular time when my physical body and health has been more so of a primary focus of attention, that we're doing the metaphysics of Earth conversation and all of that.
I
It
mean,
can be kind of, yeah. It could be coincidence, could be synchronicity, either or both. But there's that. So taking it into the realm of health, in of itself, right? And taking care of your bodily temple and the way that we perceive things, the five senses, which to go ahead and mention it, sight, taste, smell, touch, and hearing. Um, Whereas, sixth sense, extrasensory perception, uh, Debbie has touched on before in the whole psychic gift series with conversation with Raven about the clairs and all that. But in terms of how we experience the phenomena of the five senses, right? Throughout this temple, throughout what was previously referred to as the like being incarnated, which from a Gnostic point of view is incarceration. Um, how do we go ahead and take care of the physical body in and of itself? Now, there's different things such as like the basic one of like okay, do exercise, whether it's going to the gym or just walking or whatever the case may be. Um, Obviously, diet wise, pretty much like going ahead and eating more so like natural foods from the earth, from the plants, from the trees, and all sort of thing, as opposed to like a bag of Doritos and some Mountain Dew while you're going ahead and playing some video games with the buds pretty much every damn night and all that. Let's see, other sorts of things, you know, being cleanly and hygienic and all of that. But to go ahead into a particular sort of uh, I guess you could say, health methods that Debbie and I were discussing recently as well. Um, Alternative sorts of health methods, um, or at least they're seen as alternative now, as opposed to mainstream health institutions who go ahead and promote pharmaceuticals quite a bit. We
Mm-hmm.
have the one who is credited uh, by name of the philosophy of modern doctors, and just being a healthcare professional, that being Hippocrates, where to get the Hippocratic Oath from and such.
Yeah.
Um, yes, and different sorts of his sort of perspective is that everything could be handled with just natural herbs, natural plants, all these sorts of things. Um, that all diseases could be cured, everything could be handled, which, according to back in his day, he did a pretty damn good job. Hence why the man's gone ahead and been seen as like, I guess the biggest doctor of all time, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, I would go ahead and recommend on that particular subject a video by the channel Knowledge is Power, which is made by Gary Light, where he talks about these sorts of health methods by not only Hippocrates, but a Dr. Sebi, which I believe Debbie is definitely more so
Yes.
well informed and acquainted about than I. And I'll let you go ahead and
Okay.
speak on Dr. Sebi and what you have understood about him and
Okay.
what he recommends.
So, in terms of Dr. Sebi, now he is not an actual medical doctor. He was never a actual medical doctor. He is an herbalist, and quite frankly, make sure that if you are going to change diets and things of that nature and start taking supplements that are more herbal in nature, yes, talk to a herbalist that is a professional. Make sure that the person is accredited, because just because it comes from the earth does not mean it's completely safe. uh,
Oh
we
yeah.
get poisons and healthy things from the earth. It's just a matter of discernment, and of course, there is always going to be um, dosage uh, requirements. Um,
Everybody's body's different.
exactly. So, in terms of Dr. Sebi, he was an herbalist that unfortunately passed, I believe, in 2016, um, but is credited with curing like some of the worst diseases. Think HIV and AIDS, cancers, things of that nature. That is part of the claim. He was sued in New York State, I do believe, for practicing medicine without a license, and he was not arrested or actually convicted of this because he was able to produce uh, evidence that yes, these people did have this type of disease before he started treatment on them, and then after he treated them, the disease or sickness was gone. Um, but most of his methods are going to be mineral based, alkaline based in the body. He's very much, vegan, don't eat meat, which I don't know about you, but I do like me some red meat every now and again, and
Oh, damn straight.
certainly some chicken. Um, Even
Yes.
though chicken is probably one of the worst in terms of modifications and chemicals. Just saying.
Depends on the source.
Depends on
Depends
the
where you get.
source. Yes.
Yep.
But um, most of his stuff was, the drinking of alkaline water, getting the body back to a more alkaline state. And a lot of his foods are raw. There was a lot of supplements. Now, I will say anything with his name on it, do take with a grain of salt now that he is passed, because there is, unfortunately, quote, big business, unquote, that has kind of corrupted his name. So just
Oh yeah.
make sure that anything that you do decide to read on him, or um, any herbs that bear his name, any like supplements that bear his name, just make sure you're double and triple checking your source.
Oh yes. And to go ahead and I guess speak about a couple more sort of points from that video that was recommended, and things that Hippocrates or Dr. Sebi have possibly touched upon, right? Well, I know that Hippocrates touched on the next point I wanted to make is we're speaking about the different elements and such, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this being number 4 of the whole metaphysics of different elements and all that. So it seems appropriate to go ahead and mention um, what Hippocrates described as the four humors, which in of themselves are like different fluids that identify, um, different issues in the person or different components within the person, and pretty much like each of those humors have an elemental association. So this was covered in that one video, like I said,
Yes.
and
Phlegm, blood,
from
black bile, and yellow bile.
yep, and each of them I have it right here. So if we're going from the hierarchy of fire on down to earth, and just going with the modern golden dawn sort of interpretation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yellow bile is fire. Phlegm is associated with water, blood is associated with air, and black bile is associated with earth. And from going ahead and you know all these different fluids, all these different things that are within the human body in of itself, this is part of Hippocrates' process of diagnosing people and figuring out what herbs and different plants, different natural substances to utilize to cure them. Um,
Now, I will
and
say that it's a very imperfect system, and it was something that was, in terms of modern medicine, I do believe that there is a lot to be said to the credit of modern medicine. I myself would not be here without the assistance of modern medicine, because childbirth. And your girl couldn't do it. I was very, very sick. But
oh yes,
um, it is an antiquated system, but I do believe it was kind of perverted after Hippocrates' time. Um, because doctors in the 16, 17, 1800s, they were weird. Oh my god. But that's another subject in and of itself. Uh,
Oh yeah, yes. Um, but yeah, like I guess the other thing that I wanted to go ahead and touch upon is at least a recommendation, right?
mhm,
That I and myself, have been utilizing for a while, and I know that for you, at least in terms of pointing you towards a particular source of this right here, that in that video, and like a means that you can go ahead and help your health, iodine was mentioned,
mhm,
nascent iodine, and all that sort of thing, right? So when it comes to iodine, the general gist of what it's utilized for and intaking it as a supplement is that it helps your thyroid gland, which is right in the neck area in of itself, and is associated with the throat chakra of the seven chakras and such. Um, that goes ahead and helps regulate many of your internal systems, in particular your metabolism and things of that nature. And if you're not necessarily excreting the hormones and chemical compounds from your thyroid gland that you need to make sure that your body is uh, going ahead and processing things at the proper rate, then there could be quite a few issues. So for those who have too slow of a metabolism due to the thyroid being underactive, that would be what's called hypothyroidism. Truth be told, that's something that I have been dealing with throughout my life, as well as something that runs in my family. And then there's hyperthyroidism, which is too fast of metabolism and it being too overactive. So if you're trying to go ahead and get those gains by eating tons of protein and like carbs and all sort of things, but you just can't seem to keep the weight on to go ahead and hit the gym and turn that into muscle. Well, that's because you may have an overactive metabolism and potentially in a detrimental sort of way.
mhm.
You know, there is such a thing as too skinny. Um, but in any case, yeah, so I can say, at least in my own personal experience, having nascent iodine and taking iodine has been beneficial for me. It could be beneficial for you. There's many different sources of it out there. From my understanding, look for nascent iodine as opposed to things with iodide in it, and not only just the actual sort of iodine, the pure iodine in of itself, but in terms of food sources that one can go ahead and get, I guess the main ones I know of, there's quite a few, and there's plenty of infographics and web pages that speak on this sort of thing. But at least from my core understanding, some good sources of iodine. One that I happen to drink, a bit, or I could say have drunk quite a bit since coming to this discovery, is cranberry juice. Cranberries in of themselves have quite a bit of iodine within them, as well as sea salt. And also, if we're talking about, from under the sea, we have kelp, seaweed, and other sorts of sea greens as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess like I said, there's plenty of other information material on iodine in itself, but that's just I guess the best sort of health tip that I can give. That was also covered in
Oh
that
yeah.
video.
And
To at least try
also,
that.
also in terms of iodine, it is credited with the decalcification of the pineal gland within
Oh yes.
the brain. So that one
Oh
is
yeah.
supposed to be the antenna of the spiritual aspect of the self. So that's always
Oh
a good
yes.
thing as well.
Oh yeah. Of course. I forgot to mention the most important motivator of that from a spiritual woo-woo perspective. Yes, so decalcification of the pineal gland, which in of itself, right, is considered as the chemically responsible um, reason why we have extrasensory phenomena or different things such as dreams, out of body experiences, or lucid dreaming, astral projection, seeing the future, different sorts of the clairs that Divinium has covered before, like mentioned before. Um, you know, all these different sorts of phenomena are attributed to that particular part of the brain,
Hmm.
the pineal gland. So iodine definitely helps with that. And how does it necessarily get calcified? And for those that don't necessarily know what
Fluoride.
calcified is, yes, it is done by fluoride, but yes, which is in the water supply in mass across the U.S. at least. And I'm not so sure about Canada because I'm not a resident of Canada, but I wouldn't be surprised. Um, and that in of itself, calcification is the process of hardening it, the process of turning it more so into like a mineral as opposed to a regular gland. We can exist without our pineal gland, like we can survive as base humans, but we would have a less mystical experience and we would more so become NPCs than actual player characters. Go ahead and utilize that framework.
Sounds boring.
Oh yeah, yeah, I would say for sure. But yeah, so I guess in regards to, I think we've gone ahead and covered everything. Oh yeah, I will say, as I did mention the third chakra for the thyroid gland before.
Hmm.
Pineal gland is associated with the third eye, in of itself, the ajna and all that.
Hmm.
Um, and then of course above that, right on top of that is crown chakra, and then the chakras in themselves. I'm sure we'll go ahead and cover those later on, but
Oh yeah.
I guess that's what's needed for what has been just mentioned. But um, what else is there to cover? Oh yes, um, crystals, and that is definitely your department as opposed to me.
Yes.
That's for sure. So by all means, go ahead and take it away.
So, I mean, crystals, they come from the earth. They have the different properties. So, it's much like herbalism that I mentioned before, where, just because it comes from the earth does not mean it's going to have the characteristics of earth within it. Um, there are so many different crystals. Good God. The classifications are nearly unlimited. But I know some of my favorite earth based crystals is, of course, like Tiger's Eye and Obsidian. I freaking love Obsidian. But I turn into a little goblin. But, you know, those are really good points to start with. Tiger's Eye is really good for grounding. Obsidian is really good for like repelling negativity and all of that. But of course, there's going to be ones that are more associated with like water. There's going to be ones that are associated with fire, this, that, and the other. So it's really just dependent on the crystal. But me and Lona will be going into more crystals uh, later on down the road.
Oh yes, yes, for sure. Um, and then in terms of you mentioning those earthly crystals, right? From my understanding, I guess since we mentioned other chakras at this point, we
Mm-hmm.
should go ahead and mention the root chakra, and that being
Yes.
associated with the base, like survival, human needs and necessities, and that I don't know if it's particularly those crystals that you mentioned, but that there are crystals in particular that resonate with that particular chakra in of
Yes.
itself.
Yes. For, oh gosh. I always get the ones for the root and the sacral mixed up because root chakra is red. Like this is
Yeah.
red. Whereas the sacral is orange. So you can see where that could be a little bit of a slippery slope.
Oh,
Um,
yes, yes.
but
Um,
um, in terms of actual crystals that are good for the root chakra, um, I've actually found some of this in my backyard, like red jasper. Um, so that's always good. Um, but a lot of the crystals and things of that nature are going to be more for grounding. Um, Carnelian, yes. Garnet, oh, love garnet. Garnet is a good one. Why didn't I think of that earlier? My God, my brain just like stopped functioning somewhere towards the beginning of the video. It's great. Um,
oh yeah.
but mostly you're gonna find anything in that area is going to be like either a deep red or it's going to be black in color, um, like black tourmaline, obsidian, hematite. Like all of those are really good, and it's all for grounding and really connecting the energy down so you're not almost short circuiting yourself. It's like a grounding line in terms of um, electrical circuits.
And you know what? That in of itself actually takes us as a perfect segue to the last thing on my list here. It's grounding, the nature of it. So please, by
Yes,
all means, continue about grounding in of itself.
absolutely. So grounding, I always imagine like I've given this meditation to many of my friends where it's, you're finding yourself in like one of those chaotic states where you can't even think clearly. You're having trouble just formulating your thoughts. One of the best things that you can do is either go outside and put your feet in the dirt, preferably like if you're touching the dirt, that's good. Um, if you're not
How does
able
the
to do
meme go?
so, do what now?
How does the meme go that a lot of people say? Touch
Touch
grass.
grass. Yes, touch grass. Um, but in this, go outside, get your feet in the dirt. Um, or if you don't have sticker infested lawns like I do, um, go lay down in the grass and just allow yourself to completely relax, completely unfold the tension from your body, and imagine like your tailbone literally growing roots down into the ground, and just you're receiving nourishment, but you're also giving that negativity into the ground. So it's kind of creating the full circuit versus just kind of like this standalone buzzing wire that's losing its mind.
Oh yes. And if you go ahead and you check out quite a few magical books out there, including but not limited to the recently released Ritual and Essential Grimoire by Damian Eccles and his wife Lori Davis. They have quite a few things in there for grounding of itself. Once again, you can find that across many different magical books, spiritual books, and all that sort of thing. For other variations of grounding practices, but yeah, I think that's all the stuff I got on my list.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said before you covered everything on your end of things. So
Yes.
yeah,
I mean, that I think that about covers it. So, um, any last thoughts?
yeah. Woo! We finally got done with all four elements, at least from a Western understanding. Woo! We covered
Woo!
them all.
All
Woo!
right. So, this has been an awesome series. We will continue with Magic 101, just going into other different avenues or kind of increasing the depth of what we had spoken about previously or clarifying what we spoke about
Oh yeah.
previously. Um, but it has been a pleasure. And I think that's all we got. So this has been Devi. And of course, there is.
Twisted.
And we will see you guys later.
Yep. Stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.